Is it a good evening? All right, then I'll say it for us. Good evening. I'm glad you're here tonight. I'm excited to be here tonight with you. I'm excited about our study tonight. It's one of those studies that for some, maybe for most or all of us, I'm not trying to judge anyone or put anyone up or down, just an observation that for a lot of people that are Christians or at least even associated with Christianity, this is one of those studies that is familiar, but at the same time, there might be something along the way that we haven't seen or we're at least reminded of, but it's more of a study designed to encourage, to comfort, to be reminded tonight that there is no one like Him. Have you heard about Him? The one that treads the high places, the one who can speak, and not just things happen, but who can speak and things are created from nothing. Or one who can speak and the storm still. One that we can come to know and treasure and love and work toward, in a sense, loving in the way that we are loved first by Him. One that had no physical attributes to be admired or impressed by, but one who forever is the one that we, if we're honest and open and aren't blocked by sin, the fancies of Satan, the one to whom we will stand in utmost awe before. Let's take out our Bibles tonight and open up to John 13. John the 13th chapter. There is no one like, what's His name? Jesus. There's no one like Him. When we come to John 13, we are at this portion of John where we have now several chapters where John gives us a lot more detail than he ever has in his gospel account. It is not unlike the other three gospel writers. They all do this, but John does this more than the others. He really gives us a lot of information, a lot of detail, a lot of detailed words and teachings from Jesus in this final week or even now the final night before the arrest, and then what proceeds on from there. John 13 is often known as the Last Supper chapter in John's Gospel. The chapter starts, we're not necessarily going to read the first part of the chapter at all tonight, but so that we make some connections in our minds, it starts with that gathering in the upper room. Jesus and His apostles, all 12 of them, at least at first. And they all recline around the table in the upper room, as the practice would have been, and they partake of the Passover feast together. They are reminded of God's deliverance, God giving liberty and life to His people, the redemption of God by God's power to people who are unworthy, but then come to the God who made them and makes them His own. As you near the end of that scene in John chapter 13, we pick up at verse 36 tonight of John, the 13th chapter, as we examine some context. Simon Peter now speaks up in the last paragraph of John 13, and he asks, "Lord, where are you going?" Now, Jesus had told them many times over the past 3.5 years that He was going, and He had given at least some hints along the way. Sometimes not really hints. Sometimes He had been very specific about where He was going and what He was going to do, or even what would be done to Him. But they're still figuring it out. They're either ignoring it, it's just going over their head, or they are against it, like Peter was earlier in Jesus' ministry. No, this isn't going to happen. Either way, at this point, Jesus has reminded them of that again. And Peter wants to know, where are you going? And so in verse 37, Jesus answered, the rest of verse 36, "Where I am going, you cannot follow me now, but you will follow afterward." Peter said to Him, now verse 37, "Lord, why can I not follow you now? I will lay down my life for you." Jesus answered, will you lay down your life for me? Truly, truly, I say to you, the rooster will not crow till you have denied me 3 times. That's where we're left. And you finish John 13, end of the chapter. We could close our Bibles, and it wouldn't really be that great of a story, would it? And this is Peter. We know Peter. If you're familiar at all with the gospel accounts, and Peter's the one. Peter is the apostle that of the apostles, he's right up there with James and John that are mentioned the most and have this special, we call them what? The inner circle. Peter, James, and John. And Peter's right in there when there's extra special things that Jesus is going to say or show. Peter is a part of that privileged group of 3 out of the 12. And then, of course, he's in the 12 out of thousands of followers and at least a few hundred disciples at this point. Peter is the guy who makes the confession that Jesus is the Christ, the Son of the living God. That's Peter. And Jesus looks at Peter and says, no, you're not going to follow me at all costs. Not only that, you're going to deny me. You're going to tell people you don't even know me. And not just once. 3 times. Do you feel anything as you read this? Just in the other disciples, can you imagine them? We're not told, but can you imagine them as they're still propped up on an elbow? Can you imagine them and their confusion, their disappointment, their questions, their brokenness? Jesus is going away. We can't go, and this is sounding pretty ominous. And then Peter is about to deny him 3 times before the dawn. But let's not stop there. I don't want to stop there, do you? Let's read John 14. No, not the whole chapter. Don't get too excited. John 14, verse 1 now. And in a sense, we're just ignoring the chapters. The break is there. Let not your hearts be troubled. We could, and it is frequently done today, that John 14:1 is quoted as a general comfort, and it is. I mean, this usually you could put it today, you could put it whenever. But is there some reason that right here he would say, don't let your hearts be troubled? Could be. And he says this, believe in God, believe also in me. Or your version might say, if you believe in God, or if you believe God, trust me, believe in me also, or believe me. In my Father's house are many rooms. If it were not so, would I have told you that I go to prepare a place for you? And if I go and prepare a place for you, I will come again and will take you to myself, that where I am, you may be also. We could throw that into the mix of I am statements. It's pretty significant that I'm going to be, he says, if you're my disciple, you're going to be where I am. Verse 4 now. And you know the way to where I am going. Thomas said to him, verse 5, Lord, we do not know where you are going. How can we know the way? Jesus said to him, I am the way and the truth and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me. If you had known me, you would have known my Father also. From now on, you do not know him and have seen him, or you do know him and have seen him. Philip, verse 8 now, next paragraph, said to him, Lord, show us the Father, and it is enough for us. Just do that. Jesus said to him, have I been with you so long, and you still do not know me, Philip? Whoever has seen me has seen the Father. How can you say, show us the Father? Do you not believe that I am in the Father, and the Father is in me? The words that I say to you, I do not speak of my own authority, but the Father who dwells in me does his works. And in the last verse of this paragraph, believe me that I am in the Father and the Father is in me, or else believe on account of the works themselves. That gives us a bit of a look at the context surrounding our main verse or statement for the evening. This trio of I am statements that are in one sentence, one verse for us tonight. John 14, verse 6. If you picked up a copy of the handout, you might have already noticed that the main body of the outline is stolen from this verse, from this I am statement. The truth, or the way, if I can get it right in my own head tonight, the way, the truth, and the life. Let's take a few more minutes now and look at these three that Jesus describes, self-describes for us in John 14, verse 6. Consider with me the first one where Jesus says, I am the way. Each of these, by the way, in the original text, the article, the definite article that we in English write as THE, they're there. This isn't just some really stiff way of writing necessarily, the way, the truth, the life. It sounds a bit overdone or over the top. But it is Jesus emphasizing to his disciples and to us tonight as his disciples still, he's not just saying, I am a way. I am you fill in each of these. And this is no more important than here on this first one, that he's not just a way. He's the way. And if you look at that, fill in the blank there underneath the way, the idea is this then. If we had to almost summarize it, that Jesus does not simply tell us or inform us about the way. He's not just the messenger to say, hey, here's the way. Here's the way to God. Here's the way to, we might say, to heaven. Here's the way to that house where there are many rooms for you to dwell with my Father. On and on the descriptions could go. And he's not just showing us the way or a way. He's not just the one who points us. Jesus is the way. And what that means then is our title. That there's no one like Jesus because there is no other way, no other means, no other pathway to any of those things we just mentioned or anything like that but Jesus. And this does parallel well with what we said last week about John 11. This is not some vague idea or some teaching. This is, Jesus is saying, if you want the way, you have to come to know me. Not just about me, not just listen to me, but you have to come to me and love me. Get close to me. If you're in John chapter 14, you might flip over to Matthew chapter 7. We'll read two verses here from the Sermon on the Mount, verses 13 and 14, where Jesus earlier in his ministry described only two ways. Matthew chapter 7, 13 and 14. He writes, near the end of the Sermon on the Mount, enter by the narrow gate. For the gate is wide and the way is easy that leads to destruction. And there are those who enter by it are many. But, verse 14, for the gate is narrow and the way is hard or difficult that leads to life. And there are few who find it. Or those who find it are few. That's what the text says. I quoted it when I read it. Anyway, Jesus gives us these two options and says that this is what it comes down to. When you look at life, when you look at your pathway of life, there's only two choices. We sometimes think there's a lot of different options. Jesus says this is one of the times when there's only really two. And if you put this together, you could say that Jesus is the narrow way of Matthew 7:14. And that anything else, anything that is not Jesus, is the wide way. And one leads to destruction and one leads to life. Now, could we then from there say that coming to Jesus and knowing Jesus as the way, that it's not necessarily going to be easy? There might be some difficult things, some hard things to take. There are those things that we call the hard sayings of Jesus. And this is usually put in the mix with them. This basic idea of the two ways. That's who Jesus is. He's this way, or the way. If you're in Matthew 7, let's look at one other, I guess we could call them cross-references tonight. This one is from the Apostle Paul's pen, as far as the human author goes. And it's in Philippians chapter 2. This song or poem that Paul writes for us in Philippians 2, 5 through 11. As you're turning there, there was a recent study done in the United States that over 60% of those who claim to be Christians, this isn't the general population, this is limited to those, if you think you're a Christian, over 60% said that Jesus, they don't believe Jesus is the only way. They basically said, I'm a Christian, but that John 14:6 stuff, I don't know about that. And a part of the survey question was also, the answer included that Jesus isn't the only way, and that Buddha and Muhammad are also valid, additionally valid ways to salvation. Now that's the world we live in, and it's not just the world necessarily, it's people that at least claim to be the people of Jesus. But here's the reality about Jesus. Here's not only what and who he is, but why. Philippians 2, verse 5. Paul writes now, have this mind among yourselves, which is yours in Christ Jesus, who though he was in the form of God, did not count equality with God a thing to be grasped, but emptied himself by taking the form of a servant, being born in the likeness of men. Here you have his incarnation. We wanted to put one word on it. And now comes, if we also selected one term, his crucifixion. And being found in human form, he humbled himself by becoming obedient to the point of death, even death on a cross. And then the crescendo, we have his resurrection and ascension, two more terms if we only wanted to limit it to that. Therefore, God has highly exalted him and bestowed on him the name that is above every name, so that at the name of Jesus every knee should bow in heaven and on earth and under the earth. It is all inclusive, and every tongue confess that Jesus is Lord. And if Paul's writing to some who were from a Hebrew background, they might have read it like this in their minds, that Jesus is Yahweh, to the glory of God the Father. Let's just say it again tonight. Jesus is the only way. There is no other choice on the survey, not really. There are no other valid alternatives or valid options. But to say that today, those are fighting words. Do you realize that? I mean, I can say it in these four walls, and we can all amen. But you don't get very far out of these four walls, sometimes even in these four walls for that matter, and you can't say that. How can you say that Jesus is the only way? That's what John 14:6 says. Let's go back. Let's look at the second one. Jesus is not only the way, he is also the truth. For this, we have before us tonight somewhat of a survey look at truth in John's gospel up to this point and even a bit after this point. So if you've got the handout and you want to go ahead and be turning to John chapter 1 with me, that would be a good place for us to start as we think about the truth and Jesus. The truth, that is, as well as the way, is exclusive in nature. Truth, by its very nature, is exclusive. You have the truth, and anything else but that is what? It's false or an untruth. It's not true. John chapter 1, we're going to do these pretty quickly. This is meant to be a survey look at the way John has used the word truth. It's not every time, but it's most of them. Earlier, very early on, of course, now in the beginning of his book, John 1, verse 14, And the Word became flesh and dwelt among us, and we have seen his glory, glory as of the Son from the Father, full of grace and truth. And then verse 17, after he says grace upon grace, he then says the law was given through Moses. We have all received, or rather grace and truth came through Jesus Christ. And then we turn to John chapter 8, where we read the words of Jesus himself. So John says in John 1, there's something about Jesus, his very coming, his very, as we termed it earlier, his very incarnation that brings truth. That makes sense because Jesus will later say, I am the truth. It's like the truth, John is saying, literally came and walked on the earth. And then John chapter 8, Jesus explains that, yes, part of what this does mean then is that when you listen to Jesus, you're listening to the source of truth. John chapter 8, verses 31 and 32. Here he says to the disciples, or to the Jews who believed in him, we might call them disciples, if you abide in my word, you are truly my disciples, and you will know the truth, and the truth will set you free. So I stick with his words, then I can know the truth. But did you know, pun intended, that there are a lot of people today who don't even think that's possible? Who don't think it's possible to actually know truth? At least in the category of ethics, usually called morality, worship, religion, those things for sure. Over here in mathematics and science, maybe. I mean, that's not even always a given. But at least in things like this, especially that Jesus is talking about, no, you can't even know the truth. Even if it does exist, you can't know it. Jesus says, you stay with my words, you'll know the truth. And then John chapter 17, verse 17, we'll go ahead and turn there as we make our way to the last passage in John 18. This is in the middle of his prayer that takes up this chapter, John chapter 17. We're back now to this last portion of John's timeline that starts in John 13 with the Last Supper. We're really in John 12 with the entrance into Jerusalem, the final week. But now this final evening, the Last Supper. And as he makes his way, it's difficult to determine exactly when he prays this prayer. I sometimes think he might have prayed it as he was walking, making the walk through the streets and then across the river and then out to the Garden of Gethsemane. Maybe he stopped along the way and knelt down. I don't know for sure exactly all how that worked out. But here's what he says in verse 17 of that prayer. Sanctify them in the truth. Your word is truth. And if you look at this verse, you can make another interesting connection, even back to John 1. Like John 1:1, in the beginning was the Word. Okay? Now, John 17:17 is not, Jesus isn't referring to himself. He's referring to the words of God. But there's something to that as to why that's a description of Jesus. You want to look at the incarnate Word, the incarnate embodiment of God's Word, God's truth? I am truth. Then John chapter 18. We'll start at verse 33. Let's read this whole paragraph together, and then we'll look at the last of this trio. John 18 is, we're picking up in the middle of Jesus' trials. The first part of John 18 is the arrest in the garden, and then you get the farce of his trials, these ridiculous, I hate to even use the word trials. But here it's Jesus and Pilate. Jesus and Pilate. So Pilate entered, verse 33 of John 18, his headquarters again, and called Jesus and said to him, Are you the King of the Jews? Jesus answered, Do you say this of your own accord? Or did others say it to you about me? Pilate answered, Am I a Jew? Your own nation and the chief priests have delivered you over to me. What have you done? Jesus answered, My kingdom is not of this world. If my kingdom were of this world. My servants would have been fighting, but I might not be delivered over to the Jews. My kingdom is not from the world. Then Pilate said to him, so you are a king? Jesus answered, you say that I am a king. For this purpose I was born, and for this purpose I have come into the world, to bear witness to the truth. Everyone who is of the truth listens to my voice. Oh, and that might have something to do with the fact that Jesus, per his own words, a few chapters earlier, a few hours earlier, is the truth. But then, verse 38, look at Pilate's question. Pilate said to him, what is truth? And that's one that people have discussed, considered a number of different ways over the years. Is Pilate being sarcastic? Is he sincerely wanting to know? And Jesus doesn't have opportunity to answer, or at least doesn't choose to immediately answer him. That's how the conversation ends. But there are many in our world as well. And here we can hold up and compare. Here's Jesus, the truth, but here's the contrast. There are many in our world who are asking that same question. What is truth? Right now, in this country as well, in our society, our culture, and this one is not just among acclaimed Christians, this is everybody in general that's surveyed. Another recent study says that over 60%, it's actually a 3-to-1 margin, because there's a few that say we don't know, but it's like 64% of everybody says there is no absolute truth. Again, at least in morality. If you lower that to among teens, guess what? It's like 83%. I mean, just let that number, think about that. 83% of teens don't believe that truth is set in stone. It's circumstantial. It's relative. And then when it comes to decision making, they surveyed adults and teens, and there were several different categories that fell into. But by far the biggest percentage of approaches by both adults and teens for how they make decisions was based on how they felt, or what was the most comfortable decision. And then second was based on the best results that would benefit them personally. But then we have Jesus, who's the truth, reality, what is right and real, what is true. Jesus says tonight, I am the truth. May we be among those who, in a culture where the majority no longer even accept the idea of truth, we were glad to stand up and say, it's real. And it starts, and in one sense it ends, with Jesus. We have one more. Jesus in John 14:6 declares, I am the way. There is no other option. There is no other way to get to the Father. I am the truth. I am the embodiment of reality, of what is right, what is proper. I am the truth. Then he says, I am the light. We've talked about what people think in our world. What about how they feel? And this one is pervasive of everyone. Death. I think we would be safe to say tonight has touched to some level everybody in this room. And in a world like that, I mean, he's speaking to people who lived in a time when their life expectancy was quite a bit lower even than ours is. And we're still trying to fight with everything we can to get ours to grow. We want to live longer and longer. Jesus says, into that world he speaks, I am the light. If you are looking at the handout and want to fill in those blanks, I have John's thesis as the first one under the life. John's thesis. It is those last two verses of John chapter 20 where John tells us the reason he wrote this whole book. We've been reading a lot from tonight. He says, so you can believe in Jesus. But then he has another sub-reason. He has another so. So you can believe in Jesus, and then what does it say? And that by believing in his name, you might have life in his name. When Jesus says, I am the life, he is striking at the heart of the whole reason John wrote the letter or the book. So that in a world of death and decay and disease and Satan and sin, you can have life. There's John's thesis, but then you have John's letter. John's letter is 1 John chapter 5. Let's turn together there and read that one together. 1 John chapter 5, verses 12 and 13. 12 is the end of a paragraph in most English versions, almost like John 13 is the end of a chapter. You almost have to ignore the chapter break. We're going to ignore the paragraph break, shall we, tonight? 1 John chapter 5, 12, and then 13. Here's how later John writes it in his letter. Whoever has the Son has life. Why? Because Jesus is the life. Whoever does not have the Son of God does not have life. Why? Same answer. Then he says here's one of several thesis statements in the letter we call 1 John. I write these things to you who believe in the name of the Son of God. So John 20 is, I'm writing so that you will believe. Now I'm writing to people who are already there so that, he says, you may know. And here's that word again. That little word, know. You mean I can know anything, John? I said, so you can know that you have eternal, not just life. So when Jesus says, I am the life, not just life, but even eternal life. There's John's thesis, John's letter. Then we're going to switch human authors, speaker, and look at Peter's declaration. Acts chapter 4, verse 12. It'll be our last reading for the evening. Acts 4, verse 12. It comes at the end of an answer or response from Peter to the Jewish, religious, somewhat civil authorities. People like the Sadducees that had arrested Peter and John for preaching about this guy named Jesus and for preaching about the resurrection. And that hit a really soft spot with the Sadducees who didn't believe in a resurrection from the dead, life from the grave. So then, Peter says this, and there is salvation for our purposes tonight, and even in this context, we might say there is life in no one else. For there is no other name under heaven given among men by which we must be saved or can be saved. If you want life, if you want salvation, if you want life eternal, if you want to dwell in that house where we began earlier this evening in John 14:1, then you'd better be in Jesus. Jesus. There's no one like him. If you look at the last part of the handout, other than the fill-in-the-blank verse part, here's one way of thinking about it in an overall fashion. That we are, as humanity, we are bewildered. We're lost. I don't just mean in the sense of spiritually lost, condemned, but in that we don't know where to go, what to do. We base our decisions on how we feel about it. And to that, Jesus says, I am the way. We're confused. We don't know what to do as well, where to go. We don't know how we even should feel sometimes. To that, Jesus says, I am the truth. And then we're afraid. And most of our fears, they all come back to that great enemy, death. We're anxious, we're afraid. To that, Jesus says, I am the light. The reason for all of this, if we had to put it into one statement tonight, is that Jesus himself is God. So no wonder he's the way, only way to God. No wonder he is the reality, because God is the ultimate reality. No wonder he's the life, because God is the creator of all life and sustainer of all life. And if I want life anew, it's only going to be through Jesus. There's no other way. There's no one like him. Here's the really exciting part. So this is where I get to say, you can be a part of this. You can, even tonight, if you're not in Jesus, the life, like John says, if you aren't in the Son, don't have the Son, whether you haven't become a Christian or you are a Christian, but there's something that's not, something that's amiss, you can change that tonight because of Jesus. Here's how one man put it. And given certain recent events, this was written before these events, but it might even have more potential impact in our world. I'll read this and then it's his turn. He says, we are a people who worship Jesus Christ. Let that sink in. But there are places in the world where that will get you killed. We don't just admire him or follow him or swear allegiance to him. We worship Jesus. We worship him as the eternal, uncreated, omnipotent, all-wise creator, sustainer, and redeemer of the universe. He is God, one with the Father and the Spirit, and we worship God. One God in three divine persons. And so we worship Jesus. Let's stand and sing together.